Hi, I wanted to talk to you. Welcome back. I wanted to talk to you today. I wanted to continue with this Women in the Bible series. They're so beautiful, not just physically, but spiritually beautiful, internally beautiful. And I think about what would I do in some of these situations they find themselves in. They didn't ask to get there. It just happened. It was a God thing. And so then they have to deal with the situation. You know, this happens to us every day as moms and as wives and as businesswomen. Every day we find ourselves in a situation that we didn't plan on. It just happened. And then we have to deal with it. And dealing with it is the way we can see the spirit and the personality of these women. And so we're going to talk today about Esther. And I know that, or at least I believe, everyone knows the story of Esther. Now, in Hebrew, her name is Hadassah. But so you'll hear a Jewish woman named Hadassah, Hadass, or Esther. And any of them, it's all one the same thing. And it means myrtle, like the myrtle bush. And when you look at it that way, it's really a lovely name. And so we have the book of Esther. And it's pretty interesting. It's like, 10 chapters long? And it almost seems like a fantasy in many, many ways, because it's the little country girl who grows up and becomes the queen. But there's a lot to the story of this little country girl. First of all, she's Jewish. And now, the Jews have gone into captivity to Persia, and they've been there for a long time. They've been there for a long enough time that they've assimilated. And her uncle he has Mordecai. He has a Persian name. And so you see all these things that would indicate assimilation. So we have the story of Esther, and it starts off with the banquets of the king. Well, it's to me, it's colossal. It took me a long time to figure this out. But this is the story of Ahasuerus, and the story of King Ahasuerus. And he sat on his royal throne in the castle in Persia, and in Susa, the capital. And this is the governmental capital of Persia. And he's giving these banquets. And it says in the Esther 1, verse 3 says, in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, nobles and the princes of his provinces being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. That's 6 months. Wow, it's a lot of cooking, isn't it? A lot of work. And so when we think of a banquet, we have this tendency to think, well, 100 people, 50 people, 20 people. I mean, it's more than one person. But let's stop and think about how government does things. And oftentimes the government does things with these one-on-one meetings. We have the press that comes and takes the pictures here in America of the president and whatever national leader he's talking to. They have their photo ops, and they all stand outside in the rose garden if it's nice weather, and they talk and they say their things. But what really happened behind the scenes. They sit together and they talk privately, and they discuss the issues at hand, and who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. And if our president is dealing with someone who's deemed a bad guy, then he's trying to make him become a good guy in the process. And they will have a meal together. Now, we think of a meal in the Bible as a covenant meal. Usually when a decision was made, then they would have a covenant meal which would seal the decision, would bring them together as it's a done deal. And now we're on to the next phase of it. And that's usually when they come out into the rose garden and they each stand before the little podiums and they each make their statements. and they each say, wah, 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 whatever it is that they're saying, and translators and all this other stuff. So we have here the king of Susa, Ahasuerus, who's having a banquet for 180 days, 6 months. Probably, or most likely, one, maybe 2 or 3 people at a time. And what they are these are discussions regarding going to war and are you with me? And so these discussions of all these different satraps of the what we would call counties or provinces, these people have come in for this talk. And then they talk and they drink and they talk and they drink. And so in Persian history, it was one thing for them to have a banquet and talk and have this drinking festival. And then the next day they came back and they went over again what they had decided when they had been drinking. And so it was like a 2-day event. So each time he's having a banquet, you and I would say dinner with these people. And the dinner is, it's like a coming together and a sealing of the agreement. That's where they were. So they were drinking and they were celebrating because they're getting ready to go to war. And he, the king, Ahasuerus, decides to have Vashti come into him. Now, Vashti is his wife. And if we look in verse 6, it goes on about the absolutely glorious setting of this castle. It had to be exquisitely beautiful. And then in verse 8 says, and the drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion. For so the king had given orders to each official of his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. The queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Now, we see this all the time, don't we? The women, the wives of the national representatives, the national leaders, come along with their husbands sometimes, and they have a photo op with the president and his wife and the leader of the country and his wife. They do these photo ops, everybody's smiling, greeting, shaking hands, that kind of thing. And then usually you don't see the wives again. Maybe you see them at the end of the process, but usually you don't see them again because they go off and they do the girl thing. They talk and they make friends, because that's also a help to the husband, is if the women can make friends and if they can relate to the husband. Well, no, he's not really that harsh person you think. He's nice. So the women have their part to do. So on the 7th day, verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded his 7 eunuchs to go get the queen, Vashti, and bring her in, because she is exquisitely beautiful and he wants to show her off. Now, some theories are that he wanted her to come in naked. Do you really think a husband would want his wife to come in naked? Really? I mean, even if she is exquisitely beautiful. Whatever the reason was, she refused. She was not going to be hauled into this drunken party to be displayed for any reason. This is because oftentimes they brought the concubines in, and the concubines entered into the drinking with the men. And only God knows what all went on there. But Vashti says, I'm not doing this. I'm not a part of this debauchery. I don't want any part of it. And I'm not going in. So now she has rebelled against the king. Well, who would rebel against the king? I mean, really? And we have women today who won't ever say no to their husbands. And I'm not saying go say no to your husbands, because it's your life, not mine. But the whole point being is she had a right to say no. But it upset the king. He didn't know what to do. He had no idea what to do. So he gets in all these cohorts, these guys, and he says, what are we going to do? She said no. And she said no to me publicly. And now I'm embarrassed, and everybody else is embarrassed, and the whole kingdom is embarrassed because the queen wouldn't come forward when I ordered her to. And how are the servants going to mind me when the queen won't mind me? I mean, really? And so these brilliant men decided that they should banish Vashti. She should be sent away from the kingdom, and she not to be heard of again. And so that's what they did. They sent her away. And then the king goes, and they did that because they really didn't want their wives to speak to them like Vashti had spoken to the king. I was like, protecting my home here. And if the queen talks to the king like that, Mama's liable to talk to me like that. And I don't want Mama to talk to me like that. So out the door she goes. So then what happens is they go off to war. And when they come home from war, the king is lonely. The queen is not there. She's been vanished. So now they have to do something about that. And what are they going to do? Well, these same brilliant men that decided that they should vanish Vashti decided that they need to come up with a thing. So they come out and they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have every province run a contest. It's a beauty pageant. And the most beautiful woman of each province is going to come in to the castle. They'll become a part of the harem. And for a year, they'll be made ready. And then they will go to the king. And so that's what they do. They go forward. They have this beauty contest where the women are looked over, and decided. Then they're brought in out of their communities to the palace. And then for 6 months, they're sent in the palace, and then they're having all this beautiful stuff done to them. I mean, 6 months in a spa, who wouldn't like that? Kind of cool, huh? What's on the other end of the spa? That's the question. And so, they find Esther. Now, Esther is the niece of Mordecai, and her parents have died. And so Mordecai took her into his home and raised her as his. And when she was selected because of her beauty, when she was selected to go to the palace, he said to her, do not tell them that you're Jewish. Zip your lip. Hard thing to do. Don't tell them that you're Jewish. Don't even whisper it secret to a friend. Keep it quiet. And we're gonna make something. God's got something in this. So that's what they do. And he goes in. So we see here in verse 8, chapter 2, verse 8. So Esther finds favor with the people in the guys who are preparing the women. He says, so it came about when the commanded decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered to Susa, the capital, into the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace into the custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. Now the young lady pleased him and found favor with him, so he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and food, gave her 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and transferred her and the maids to the best place in the harem. I mean, sometimes it's a good idea to play nice, and she played nice. She was nice, she was gorgeous, and she kept her manners, and she did as she was told, and no talking back. Quite opposite of Vashti, wasn't it? So then they go in. Every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. And then when the turn of each young lady came to go into the king, after the end of her 12 months under the regulations for women, for the days of beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. I mean, a whole year in the spa. You would either be outrageously gorgeous or have granny wrinkles, one way or the other. So that she would go into the king, and then when her services with the king were done, she was sent off to another harem, and that was where she would stay the rest of her life unless the king specifically called for her. However, when she went to the king, she was allowed to take gifts with her, gifts for herself. So when it's Esther's turn, she's asked for wisdom. She said to her caretakers, what should I choose? I don't know what to choose. I don't know what to take. I don't know what's expected of me, and I don't know what's going to happen in the future. What do you think I should do? She asked for advice. And then she took the advice. A lot of people ask for advice, but they don't take it. So anyhow, she asked for advice, and then she followed the advice. And so then when she went into the king, he fell in love with her. Not only did she please him as a woman, but he fell in love with her, and he made her his queen. Pretty cool story. And so she was the queen for a period of time, for 5 years. And then all of a sudden, the story happens with her uncle. Now, in Persia, there was this casting of the lots. You know, they had these little square things, like like a die, if you will, larger, and they had the guys' names on them and stuff like that. And so every year they cast these lots for who would be closest to the king in an advisory position. And there was always a conflict between Haman and between Mordecai. Now, Haman was not a native Persian. He was an immigrant. We don't know where he came from, but he was doing everything that he could do to put himself in a position of authority and favor with the king, always doing the kiss up thing. Well, Uncle Mordecai also sat in the gates of the city, and he was considered a wise man. And you know, when these guys sat in the gates of the city, they sat there for judging. You know, people would come to them, tell them their problems, tell them their story, their needs. And then these judges would give them wisdom and suggestions, and then they would go forward and find out follow through with what the judge had said. So Haman was quite proud of himself. In chapter 3 of Esther, we see where Haman's plot against the Jews begins. It says, in those days, I'm going back to chapter 2, verse 21. It says, in those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's officials from those who guarded the door, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Now, when the plot was investigated and found to be so, they were hung on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. Okay, so that happened. And then it was filed away in the files in the king's secret library chamber. And then along comes Haman. Chapter 3, verse 1. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. Now, once again, this is similar to the story of Daniel. Mordecai wasn't going to do it. There is no clear reason why Mordecai refused to do it. There was undoubtedly a conflict between the two guys for whatever reason, but there's nothing in Judaism that prevents a man from bowing down before another man. After all, you look at the story of Joseph. When his brothers came to him, they bowed down. He bowed down before Pharaoh. I mean, we see a lot of this bowing down stuff in Judaism, so there's nothing to prevent a Jewish man from bowing down in front of another man. However, there was a theory that Mordecai had a big emblem on his chest, wore it like jewelry, and it was an idol. And no Jew is going to bow down to an idol. So it could have been thought by those watching, observing, that when Mordecai bowed down, if he did, to Haman, he was bowing down to this alleged idol that he was wearing around his neck. We don't really know why, other than that there was a conflict between them. So Haman got angry because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. And they were down. I mean, can you just see this, walking by like this? Everybody's bowing down, but he's looking to see, wow, this little guy, he won't bow down to me. Off he goes, off he goes. He probably walked back and forth 6 times just in front of Mordecai just to see if he's going to bow down to him. And you know what? He never did. And it made him so mad. He couldn't stand it. So mad that he decided he was going to get Mordecai and he was going to get him killed. But he had to use wisdom in how he was going to do it. So he wanted to annihilate not just Mordecai, but all the Jews. He was that mad. So he makes a plot, and he decides that he is going to do something about it. So we see in the first month, verse 7, in the first month, which is month of Nisan, the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, that is the lot, was cast from Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. So that means that Haman is the person in authority here next to the king. He's the one casting the lot, And so he's the one that's next to the king in authority. And so he decides, he says to the king There's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. So it's not in the king's interest to let them remain. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries. Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and he gave it to Haman and said, do your thing. Why would a king do this? Just blindly give his signet ring to this guy, even though he's next in authority to the king, and say, go do what you want to do. Now, they were drinking together. That's a definite thing. But Haman is plotting, and he wants this to happen. And so now he's got the king's permission. And the 10,000 talents is a huge amount of money. Huge. Now we think, okay, he's just going to write a check and put it in the king's coffers, or he's going to go home to his safe, get it out of the safe, put it in the king's coffers. But it's a colossal amount of money, much larger than we even comprehend. And so he was giving himself 11 months to come up with this money. And the way he was doing it was he was putting a tax on these Jews. He sent out all of Persia a tax on the Jews. Now, it went out really fast. Now, Persians were brilliant, and they had established what we would call, they were the forerunners of the postal system, the forerunners of Wells Fargo and all these other things, where they had the Pony Express, and they sent runners, much like you have this Greek baton passing. And no kidding, within a week, they could send a message to Egypt and get it back within a week because of their runner system. And so Haman sent out on this runner system to all the provinces of Persia that on this day, 11 months from now, they're going to annihilate the Jews. Now, what would you do? What would you do if you got that thing? But he was clever enough to say, okay, we can't just say we're going to kill Jews. We got to have a reason. And so he said, okay, everybody has to pay a per person tax. And the tax is a colossal amount of money. Keep using that colossal word, but it's colossal. So anyhow, they're putting this tax on the Jewish people, and then they give them 11 months to come up with the amount of money. And the amount of money is so large that it's impossible for them to come up with it. And if they don't come up with it, then it's a death sentence. That's how he's going to do it. That way he'll have money to put in the king's treasure, and whatever's left over, if there's more than 10,000 talents, it's his. The king just said, okay, do as you want to. I take the 10,000. Now, why would the king agree to this? We have to remember, there's been wars. There's been 2 wars that lasted 2 years each, and they were very expensive wars, and there was uprising in Egypt that the king had to put down, and he's fighting and fighting and fighting, and wars are expensive. We know that. I mean, look at our national debt. Wars are expensive. And so the king agreed because he needed the money in his coffers, was why he agreed to this. So we go on then with our story. And Mordecai learns of the plot. Remember, small town, busy lips. So Mordecai learns of the plot, and so he goes to Esther, the queen, and he tells her about it. And he says, this is what's happening, and you need to know that we're all going to be killed. And she's scared. She's really afraid because she has not been called into the king's presence for a month. Now, it could be that he has a new chickie that's giving him great pleasure, and he's dealing with this new chickie and not calling Esther in. So she says, the king hasn't called me in for a month. If we're going to do this, then we're going to have to fast and pray. And everybody has to fast and pray. And Mordecai had said to her, who knows? But for this reason, for this purpose, may be the reason that you were born. And don't think that you will survive by not doing it. Because somebody else will go to the king and somebody else will do something, but you will perish. So for this reason, you were brought into this earth. So she agrees to go to the king, but she says, all right, for 3 days, everybody is going to fast. I'm going to fast. You're going to fast. My maidens will fast. and then I'll go to the king. And there is how the story goes down. So Esther learns of Haman's plot from Mordecai. And so she and her maidens fast. I wanted to go on then. So in the meantime, the king couldn't sleep one night. So he calls for his servants to come in and read him a story. He needs a bedtime story so he can sleep. And so they go into the vault and they bring out the Chronicles of the Kings. And they read this story to him about Bigtan and Tushan and how Mordecai the Jew, had saved the king by telling the king's officials what was going to happen. And those two servants were annihilated, and Mordecai just continued sitting at the gate of the city. And so the king says to his servants there, he said, okay, what did we do for him? What did we do for Mordecai? Did we do anything? I mean, did we give him a reward? Did we do a banquet for him? What did we do for him? And they said, well, it doesn't say we did anything for him. And he said, well, we can't have that. We have to call him in. We have to do something special. So he's trying to think out what to do. And so the next morning when he gets up, he's working on this plan to bless Mordecai and to bring to him the glory that should have been his from saving the king. Now, we're getting close to time being up. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to say, we're going to finish this next time we're together. In the meantime, I wanted to just once more tell you about this book, Genesis Triangle, that I've written. It's a great book. I can say that because I feel like God dictated it to me. And it was a teaching on Rachel, Leah, and Jacob that the Lord gave me. And every time I taught it, people said to me, do you have this in writing? You know, I need this, I need this, and I need this. And I didn't know what to do with it until one morning I was sitting in church and when the title Genesis Triangle fell into my head. So you can get this on Amazon, you can get it from me, and I think you'll enjoy it. In the meantime, Shalom, Shalom, Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.